The ballroom glittered a sea of diamonds and arrogance, and Mark Stafford was the king of his small, perfect world. His new wife Chloe was a trophy on his arm, and his success felt inevitable. He laughed thinking of the woman he'd left behind, his plain, unambitious ex-wife. He imagined her clipping coupons in a tiny apartment. But then the music stopped. Security, stern and imposing, began clearing a path through the crowd. Mark was annoyed, pushed aside like a nobody, until he saw who they were clearing the way for. The woman who stepped out of the Rolls-Royce wasn't just his ex-wife. She was a queen. The grand charity ball at the New York Public Library was not merely an event. It was a declaration. It was a place where old money reluctantly mingled with new, and where men like Mark Stafford could measure their ascent. Tonight Mark felt he had finally arrived. He adjusted the silk lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo, a smug smile playing on his lips. Beside him, his wife Chloe was a vision in a shimmering backless Vera Wang gown that had cost more than his first-year salary. Her diamonds, a recent gift from him, caught the light from the massive chandeliers, scattering fractured rainbows across her skin. "Darling," Chloe purred, linking her arm through his. "Robert Jennings is waving us over. His firm just landed the new tech IPO. Mark nodded, his gaze sweeping the room. Of course. Let's not keep him waiting. Mark Stafford was a man sculpted by ambition. He was a senior vice president at a mid-tier private equity firm, a position he'd secured not just through his own ruthless networking, but by marrying Chloe. Her father, Michael Reed, was a titan, a man whose name opened doors that Mark had once only peered at through keyholes. Tonight, Mark wasn't just Mark Stafford. He was the son-in-law, the chosen one, the man who had successfully traded up. As they navigated the throng, Mark accepted compliments with practiced ease. "Mark, fantastic quarter," one man boomed. "Chloe, you look divine," another whispered. He loved this. He loved the scent of expensive perfume, the clinking of champagne flutes, the quiet, desperate hum of networking. His new life was perfect. It was solid, expensive, and shiny. It was everything his old life was not. His old life. The thought surfaced like a bad taste. His old life had a name, Sophia. He allowed himself a brief dismissive thought of his ex-wife. Sophia Hayes. Plain, quiet, brilliant in a bookish way, Sophia. The woman who had proofread his MBA thesis. The woman who'd managed their tiny budget so he could afford the right suits for his interviews. The woman who, in the end, just hadn't been enough. He'd told her as much 2 years ago in the beige living room of their rented condo. "I'm moving forward, Soph." He'd said the words clinically cruel. "This. Us. It's just not ambitious enough. I need more. You're comfortable." "Comfortable," she had repeated, her voice hollow. "You're happy with coupons and spreadsheets. I want this." He gestured vaguely at the life he now had. He'd left her, and thanks to a prenup he'd insisted on when his first big bonus hit, she'd been left with very little. He'd heard through the grapevine she was working some low-level data entry job, living in a tiny studio apartment in Queens. The thought provided a satisfying dark punctuation to his own success. He was here. She was there. The natural order of things. "Mark, darling, are you listening?" Chloe's voice snapped him back. "I said Robert is talking about the merger." "Absolutely, darling." He refocused, his corporate smile locking back into place. He was schmoozing with Robert Jennings, laughing at a joke that wasn't funny when the atmosphere in the room suddenly shifted. It wasn't a loud noise, it was a change in pressure. The murmur of conversation near the grand marble entrance quieted. Then a line of men in dark, impeccably tailored suits and clear earpieces moved into the room. They weren't the venue's security. They were private. They moved with a silent, imposing efficiency, creating a wide, clear path from the door toward the main dais. "What on earth?" Chloe murmured, annoyed. "They're blocking the path to the bar." Mark frowned. A few prominent guests, including Chloe's father, were asked to step aside. "Step aside, sir." "Ma'am, please clear the walkway." The tone was polite but non-negotiable. Mark felt a flash of indignation. He and Chloe were also waved back by a man with a jawline that looked carved from granite. "Who the hell do they think they are?" Mark muttered, fixing his tie. "Must be a politician." "Ugh, how tedious," Chloe huffed. The room was now split in two by this invisible wall of security. All eyes turned to the entrance. The music a live string quartet faltered for a moment. A black Rolls-Royce Cullinan had pulled up outside its engine, a whisper. A driver hastened to open the rear door. The first person to emerge was a man whose presence sucked the air from the room. Mark recognized him instantly. Everyone did. Marcus Harrison, the reclusive, legendary tech billionaire. Harrison hadn't been seen at a public event in 5 years. He was the white whale of investors, a man who built and dismantled entire industries from his private island. A collective gasp went through the gala. Chloe's hand tightened on Mark's arm. "Oh my God," she breathed. "It's him. Father has been trying to get a meeting for a year." Mark's heart hammered. This was an opportunity. If he could just get a word in. Marcus Harrison stood by the open car door, but he didn't move. He turned back, his expression uncharacteristically soft, and offered his hand to the passenger still inside. A black, high-heel, simple and lethally elegant, stepped onto the pavement. Then a leg disappearing into the sleek lines of a sapphire-blue Armani gown. The dress was not ostentatious. It was structural, powerful, and utterly refined. The woman who emerged was not beautiful in the way Chloe was beautiful. Chloe was a decoration. This woman was a statement. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon revealing simple diamond studs. Her makeup was minimal, her posture was perfect, and her gaze was steady. She took Marcus Harrison's hand, and Mark Stafford's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was shockingly loud in the sudden silence. But Mark didn't notice. He couldn't breathe. Chloe, oblivious, whispered, "Who is that? Is that his wife? I've never seen her before. She's so plain." Mark's voice was a dry croak. His entire perfect, shiny world had just cracked down the middle. "That," he whispered, his blood turning to ice. "That's Sophia. 2 years ago." The smell of stale coffee and cheap toner. Sophia Hayes stared at the stack of bills on her particle board desk. Past due, final notice. They were all addressed to her. Mark, in his surgical extraction from their marriage, had been meticulous. The car was leased in his name. The condo was in his name. The joint accounts had been systematically drained to pay for shared debts she didn't even know they had, mostly from his new expensive lifestyle. He had left her with her personal savings, $1, $428, and a pile of tax forms from the consulting work she'd done to support him, for which she was now liable. She was 34 years old with a master's degree in financial mathematics, and she was applying for data entry jobs that paid $18 an hour. The breakup itself had been a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. It hadn't been a fight. It had been a performance. Mark had sat her down, not on their worn-out sofa, but on a hard dining chair he'd pulled into the middle of the room as if it were an interrogation. "Soph, I'm going to be direct because I respect you." He'd begun a lie so blatant it stung more than the truth. "This isn't working." She had braced herself. She'd seen it coming. The late nights, the scent of Chloe's Santal 33 perfume on his suits, the way he'd started to look at her not with hatred, but with something worse, pity. "You're not growing," he'd continued pacing. "I'm on a rocket, Sophia. I'm heading for the stratosphere. And you're ballast. You're comfortable." That word again. Comfortable. It was the word he used for her old-fashioned loyalty, for her refusal to play corporate games, for her belief that their partnership was about more than just his career. "I built your career, Mark," she'd said, her voice shaking. "The algorithms you used in your pitch to KKR, those were mine. The financial model that got you your promotion, I wrote it on our honeymoon while you were scuba diving." He had the audacity to look wounded. Don't be petty, Sophia. We were a team, but teams change. The league gets bigger. You don't have the killer instinct. Chloe's father, Mr. Reed, he sees my potential. He wants to nurture it. Chloe sees your potential, you mean? Mark had sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. See, this is what I'm talking about. This smallness. You're thinking about cheating. I'm thinking about legacy. He'd told her he was moving out. He'd told her his lawyer would be in touch. He'd told her not to make it messy. I'm giving you a clean break, Soph, he'd said, standing by the door, already looking like a stranger in his expensive suit. It's a chance for you to, I don't know, find someone on your own level, go back to school, whatever it is you people do. You people. The door had closed. She had not cried. Not then. She sat on the hard chair for 3 hours, the silence of the beige condo pressing in on her. The life she had patiently, lovingly built, the career she had sacrificed for his, had been packed up and taken away like rented furniture. He hadn't just left her. He had erased her. For 6 months, she spiraled. The rejections from investment banks were polite but firm. While your academic background is impressive, Ms. Hayes, a 2-year gap combined with your previous role at, well, nowhere, makes you a difficult fit for our fast-paced environment. She was too old to be an analyst, too inexperienced to be a VP. She was trapped in the professional purgatory he had designed for her. She finally took the data entry job. It was humiliating. The fluorescent lights buzzed. The stale coffee was free. She sat in a cubicle farm inputting numbers, her brilliant mind screaming. One night, sipping cheap vodka from a coffee mug in her tiny Queens studio, she'd been scrolling through LinkedIn. She saw Mark's promotion. A picture of him and Chloe beaming at a top 30 under 30 finance event. His post was full of platitudes. Incredibly humbled. Had blessed. Huge thanks to my team and my mentor, Michael Reed. Sophia stared at the screen. The fog of her depression, the gray numbness, suddenly burned away. It was replaced by something white-hot. It wasn't just anger, it was fuel. Ballast, she whispered to the empty room. I'll show you ballast. She turned off the TV. She logged out of LinkedIn. She opened the laptop she'd bought with her first data entry paycheck. She pulled a dusty textbook from a box, Stochastic Processes and Financial Futures. She wasn't going to apply for jobs anymore. She was going to create one. She remembered the algorithm she'd written for Mark, the one he'd claimed as his. It was good, but it was basic. It was a toy. In the 2 years since she'd had ideas. Big ideas. Ideas about predictive modeling for high-frequency trading, about identifying systemic risk before it cascaded. She worked from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. every night. Her data entry job paid for her rent and her servers. She ate ramen and drank black coffee. She didn't date. She didn't see friends. She coded. She backtested data. She built a model. After 3 months, it was functional. After 6, it was brilliant. It could analyze global market chatter, regulatory filings, and shadow banking systems to predict with 94% accuracy a market shock event 2 weeks before it happened. She called it Cassandra. She didn't send it to a bank. She didn't put it on her resume. She packaged her findings, a concise 20-page white paper showing how her model would have predicted the last 3 flash crashes, and she sent it to one person. She sent it to the private encrypted email of Marcus Harrison, the one man in the world who would understand, the one man who saw finance not as a game of golf, but as a war of information. She didn't expect a reply. She went to her cubicle the next day, her eyes burning, and she input her numbers. 2 days later at 11:04 a.m., her burner phone rang. It was an unlisted number. Ms. Hayes? The voice was quiet, raspy, and unmistakable. Marcus Harrison. Your math is elegant. My jet is landing at Teterboro in 90 minutes. Be there. The line clicked dead. Sophia stared at the buzzing fluorescent light above her desk. She logged out of her terminal. She took her cheap coat. She didn't say goodbye to her manager. She walked out of the building and never looked back. The Teterboro tarmac was windswept and gray. A Gulfstream G650 sat waiting, its engines idling with a low, powerful hum. Sophia, clutching her laptop bag, was the only passenger. The flight attendant, who looked more like a senior diplomat, offered her champagne. Sophia asked for water and a legal pad. By the time she landed in the Bahamas, where Harrison kept his private innovation hub, a team was waiting for her. They weren't bankers. They were quants data scientists and 2 former NSA cryptographers. Marcus Harrison met her in a simple, glass-walled office overlooking the ocean. He was in a linen shirt and shorts, looking more like a retired beach bum than a man who could buy countries. "Cassandra," he said, tapping her white paper on his desk. "It's predictive, it's clean, but it's reactive. I don't want to predict the crash, Ms. Hayes. I want to be the one who causes it, or the one who prevents it. Can you do that?" Sophia, running on 3 hours of sleep and pure adrenaline, didn't flinch. "Yes, but I need access to real-time global trade clearing data, not the 24-hour delayed feeds. I need the raw feed from SWIFT, DTCC, and the major exchanges." Harrison smiled. It was a cold, appreciative smile. "I have that." For the next 18 months, Sophia was not a person. She was a mind. She was forged. Harrison gave her unlimited resources, a black card budget, and a team of 20 geniuses. He was a brutal, brilliant mentor. He tore apart her assumptions, pushed her to think bigger, and taught her the language of true power. "Loyalty is a currency, Sophia," he told her one night over a game of chess. "Don't spend it on people who are bankrupt." He taught her about leverage, about how the real money wasn't in stocks. It was in debt, in logistics, in the structural weaknesses of over-leveraged companies. She learned. She absorbed. She rebuilt Cassandra from the ground up. It was no longer just a predictive model. It was an X-ray of the global economy. It could see the stress fractures in a company's foundation, the hidden debts, the executive dependencies, the political risks. It was a weapon. 6 months ago, she'd presented her first major finding. "Harrison Global Ventures," she'd said, addressing the board from their London office where she was now based. "We've been focused on acquiring tech. We're wrong. The real opportunity is in logistics and the mid-level private equity that funds it, specifically firms with high exposure to European port regulations." She put a name on the screen. "Reed Capital Partners." "Reed Capital," she explained, "looks robust. It's run by Michael Reed. It's got a solid reputation, but Cassandra shows it's dangerously over-leveraged. 90% of its portfolio is tied up in shipping firms that are reliant on a single trade route, one that is about to be politically destabilized. Furthermore, their entire executive leadership is a nepotism trap." She clicked to the next slide, a picture of Mark Stafford smiling from a finance blog. This is Mark Stafford, the COO. He's also the founder's son-in-law. His risk management strategies are non-existent. He's been cooking the books not illegally but unethically, shuffling assets to hide the portfolio's core weakness. Reed Capital is a house of cards. When this trade route is renegotiated in 3 months, they won't just stumble. They'll implode. The board was silent. "So we short them?" one VP asked. "No," Sophia said, her voice cutting through the room. "Shorting is messy. It's a gamble. We acquire them. Or more precisely, we acquire their debt. Right now, it's still rated A+. We buy it for pennies on the dollar through shell corporations. When they default, we don't just take their assets. We take the company. We take their board seats. We take everything." Marcus Harrison had watched her, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he simply said, "Execute it." Sophia spent the next 3 months orchestrating the most complex, hostile, and silent acquisition in modern history. She bought Reed Capital's debt from dozens of different holders, masking the purchases so Reed's alarms never went off. 2 weeks ago, the trade deal had collapsed, just as Cassandra predicted. Reed Capital's portfolio went into freefall. The margin calls began. Yesterday, Michael Reed had woken up to discover that his primary creditor, a mysterious holding company based in the Caymans, was calling in his entire $9 billion debt. A debt he couldn't pay. The holding company, in turn, offered a solution, a full acquisition. That holding company was, of course, Harrison Global Ventures. The acquisition was finalized this afternoon. Tonight's gala was coincidentally the perfect place to announce it. The board of the charity was full of Reed's allies. Harrison had insisted Sophia join him. "You built the weapon, Ms. Hayes. You should be there to see it fire." She had hesitated. "I don't know, Marcus. It seems petty," he'd asked. "No, it's closure. You're not going as Mark's ex-wife. You're going as the new CEO of Harrison's European operations. The position is your reward for this." So she had agreed. She'd put on the Armani dress Harrison's personal shopper had sent. She'd looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the comfortable Sophia. This was someone new, someone forged, someone who understood ballast. She had realized with a cold, clear certainty that ballast wasn't what held the rocket down. It's what gave it stability before it launched. Mark had just let go too soon. The moment Sophia stepped onto the marble floor of the ballroom, the silence that had fallen stretched, becoming thin and taut. It was a silence born of pure, unadulterated shock. Marcus Harrison, the kingmaker, had arrived, and he had brought with him an unknown queen. Sophia walked with a stillness Mark had never seen. Her steps were unhurried. Her gaze was not darting around nervously, soaking in the glamour. It was directed, focused, and completely, utterly, terrifyingly calm. She was not overwhelmed by the room. The room was overwhelmed by her. Mark stood frozen, the shattered pieces of his champagne flute at his feet. A waiter rushed to clean it up, but Mark didn't notice. "Sophia," he breathed. The name felt alien in his mouth. "Mark, who is she?" Chloe insisted, her voice now sharp with irritation. She pulled on his arm. "You know her? How do you know her? Is she one of your old assistants?" The insult, which would have once amused Mark, now made his stomach clench. Sophia and Marcus Harrison were now moving. The line of security moved with them, a discreet, protective bubble. They were not walking the perimeter schmoozing as Mark had been. They were walking straight to the dais where the event organizers and the mayor of New York were waiting. The mayor, a man Mark had been trying to get a photo with all night, rushed to greet them. He shook Harrison's hand, then turned to Sophia, his expression one of deep respect. "Ms. Hayes," the mayor said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "A pleasure. Your work on the new Urban Tech Fund is revolutionary." "Mr. Mayor," Sophia's voice replied. It was the same voice, the same soft timbre, but the hesitation was gone. The upward lilt of uncertainty she'd always had was replaced by a flat, declarative confidence. "Thank you for having us. Marcus and I are eager to discuss the next phase." Ms. Hayes. Marcus and I. Mark felt a wave of dizzying vertigo. This was not possible. This was a nightmare. Perhaps he'd had a bad oyster. Chloe, however, had processed the scene and arrived at a different, more cynical conclusion. Her painted lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, I see," she whispered to Mark, her voice dripping with venom. "Your mousy little ex-wife. She cleaned up, got a makeover, and landed Marcus Harrison. My God, she's a gold digger." A gold digger. Mark seized on the explanation. It was the only one that made sense. It was the only one that kept his world intact. Of course. Sophia, bitter and abandoned, had used her looks, what little she had, and played the damsel in distress, snaring the biggest whale of all. She wasn't powerful. She was a parasite, just on a grander scale. The relief was so profound he almost laughed. "That's it," he murmured. "She's with him. That's all this is." "Pathetic," Chloe scoffed. "And he's so old, still a billionaire. I suppose even a 4 can become a 10 with that kind of money. Well, don't you dare speak to her. It's humiliating." But Mark couldn't look away. He was obsessed. He needed to see her. He needed to confirm his new theory. He needed to see her fawn over Harrison to see the obsequious dependent woman he'd left. He watched her as she stood on the dais. She was talking to a senator and the CEO of J.P. Morgan. She wasn't fawning. She was briefing them. The men were leaning in, listening. Harrison was standing beside her, not as her protector, but as her partner. He nodded at something she said, a look of genuine approval on his face. The world tilted again. I need a drink, Mark muttered. He broke away from Chloe, moving toward the bar, his path intentionally taking him near the dais. He needed to get closer. He had to hear. As he approached a security guard, the same one with the granite jaw put a polite, firm hand on his chest. "I'm sorry, sir. This area is reserved." "I'm Mark Stafford," he said, his voice tight. "I'm with Michael Reed. The guard's expression didn't change. "This area is reserved, Mr. Stafford." Mark was a guest. He was a VP, and he was being blocked. He looked past the guard. Sophia was just 20 feet away. She turned her head slightly, her eyes sweeping the room. For a single heart-stopping second their eyes met. Mark saw no recognition, no pain, no anger, no longing. She didn't see Mark, her ex-husband, the man who had destroyed her. She saw a man in a tuxedo standing where he shouldn't be, being turned away by security. She held his gaze for half a second, and then she looked right through him. She turned back to the senator and continued her conversation. That more than the Rolls-Royce, more than Harrison, was the blow that shattered him. It wasn't that she hated him. It was that she didn't see him at all. He had been relegated from ballast to simple, irrelevant background noise. "Mark!" Chloe was hissing at him from across the floor. "What are you doing? You look like a stalker. Get over here!" He stumbled back, his face burning with a shame so profound it tasted like acid. His perfect night, his perfect wife, his perfect life. It all felt like a cheap imitation, a child's drawing next to a masterpiece. He rejoined his wife, his smile now a painful, frozen mask. She looked right at me," he whispered, horrified. "Good," Chloe snapped. "She should be ashamed of herself showing her face here. Now fix your tie. My father is coming over. He looks upset." Mark looked up. Michael Reed was indeed striding toward them. But he wasn't upset. He was terrified. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and he was staring slack-jawed at the woman on the dais. "Michael, what's wrong?" Mark asked. "That's her," Michael Reed whispered, his voice cracking. "The one from the acquisition papers. The holding company. Hayes. S. Hayes. That's her." Mark didn't understand. "What are you talking about?" "She's not with Harrison, Mark." Michael groaned, his hand gripping Mark's shoulder so tightly it hurt. "She is Harrison. She's the new CEO. She's the one—" "Dear God, she's the one who just bought my company." The blood didn't just drain from Mark's face. It evaporated. He felt lightheaded, the sound of the string quartet suddenly muffled as if he were underwater. "What? That's not possible," Mark stammered. "Bought Michael. We just posted our best quarter. The board was thrilled. I finalized the reports myself." "The reports were lies, Mark." Michael hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. He pulled Mark and Chloe into a secluded alcove, his eyes wild. "You and your creative accounting. You shuffled the debt from the shipping portfolio. You didn't hide it. You consolidated it. You made it a single perfect target. I stabilized us. You made us easy to kill." Michael choked, looking like he was going to be sick. "They didn't buy the company, you idiot. They bought the debt, all of it. The margin call came from a single entity this morning. CG Ventures. I thought it was a competitor. It's a shell for Harrison Global. And the signatory on the final execution was S. Hayes." Chloe for the first time looked truly afraid. Her flawless makeup couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. "Father, what does this mean? What are you saying? Tell them to stop." "You don't tell Marcus Harrison to stop," Michael spat. "He doesn't buy you. He guts you. They... Oh, God." Mark's mind was racing, trying to process the impossible. Sophia. His Sophia. The woman who alphabetized their spice rack. The woman who cried during commercials. She couldn't have orchestrated a multi-billion-dollar corporate raid. "It's a mistake," Mark insisted, grasping at straws. "She must be a front. Harrison is using her name. It's a cruel joke. He found out she was my ex-wife, and he's using her to humiliate me." Michael Reed stared at him with dead, hollow eyes. "You really are that stupid, aren't you? He's not using her. He promoted her. Look at them." The three of them peered from the alcove. The main presentation of the night was beginning. Marcus Harrison had taken the stage to a deafening round of applause. Thank you," Harrison said, his voice calm and powerful. "It's wonderful to be back in New York. I'm not usually one for parties, but tonight is a special occasion. Harrison Global has just completed a major acquisition, one that positions us to revolutionize the global shipping and logistics industry. It was a move orchestrated by a mind I can only describe as one of the most brilliant I have ever encountered." Mark felt his entire body go rigid. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harrison continued, "it is my profound privilege to introduce to you the future of my company, the new CEO of Harrison Global Ventures European Division, Ms. Sophia Hayes." Sophia stepped up to the microphone. The applause was thunderous. She didn't smile, not at first. She simply stood there, owning the silence that followed. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. Her voice, amplified, filled every corner of the vast library. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. What Marcus calls brilliance is quite simply a commitment to seeing what is truly there. For too long, the financial world has rewarded bravado over stability. It has allowed firms to build empires on foundations of sand, leveraging their futures on risky nepotistic bets, all while hiding their toxic assets behind complex paperwork. Every word was a perfectly sharpened knife aimed directly at Mark and Michael. "Our acquisition of Reed Capital Partners," she said, her voice dropping to a clinical chill, "is the first step in a new direction. We will be restructuring the company from the ground up. We will eliminate redundancies. We will clear out the rot. And we will restore value to a portfolio that has been creatively mismanaged." A low, shocked murmur spread through the room. She had just announced the hostile takeover. She had just called Michael Reed's company rot. Chloe made a small, strangled noise. She can't do this." "She just did," Michael whispered. His phone was vibrating, a relentless, frantic buzzing from his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen was a waterfall of panicked texts from his board members. "Mark," Michael said, his voice devoid of all hope. "Your position, your seniority, it's all tied to me. When I'm gone, I'm the COO," Mark said weakly. "I have a contract." "You have nothing," Michael snapped. "Your contract is with my company, and she just bought it. You're a redundancy, Mark. You're the nepotistic bet. You're fired." Mark looked at Sophia, who was now elegantly fielding a question from the senator, looking completely at ease. She was discussing supply chain analytics. He had called her comfortable. He had called her ballast. He had told her she wasn't ambitious, that she was holding him back from the stratosphere. And she had responded by building her own rocket, flying past him and blotting out his sun. He was a fool. He had been a blind, arrogant fool. He hadn't just divorced his wife. He had divorced the very architect of his success. He hadn't just left her with nothing. He had left her with the one thing that mattered, the anger, the drive, and the sheer terrifying intellect he had been too stupid to value. "I have to talk to her," Mark said, a new desperate plan forming. He could apologize. He could beg. He didn't know what he could do, but he had to do something. "Mark, no." Chloe grabbed his arm. But he was already moving. He pushed past his father-in-law, past his weeping wife, and strode onto the floor. He walked directly toward the dais, ignoring the stairs. "Sophia!" he called out. The conversation on the stage stopped. The security guard tensed. Sophia turned, her expression unreadable. "Sophia, please," Mark said, his voice cracking. He was 10 feet from the stage in the middle of the empty, cleared-out space. "We need to talk. This is a mistake. What you're doing. You're destroying my life." Sophia looked down at him from the stage. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. She leaned into the microphone. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the entire silent ballroom. "I'm sorry," she said, her gaze holding his. "Who are you?" The question hung in the air, a perfect, glittering, cruel blade. "Who are you?" Mark froze. The entire room, the senators, the CEOs, the old money matriarchs, was staring at him. He was a nameless man in a tuxedo shouting at the guest of honor. He was a heckler, a nobody. I'm Mark." He stammered the words, feeling thick and useless in his mouth. "I'm Mark Stafford. He couldn't say, your ex-husband. It would be the final pathetic nail in his coffin. Sophia tilted her head, a flicker of something not recognition but cold analysis in her eyes. "Mr. Stafford." "Ah, yes." She turned to Marcus Harrison. Mr. Stafford was the chief operating officer at Reed Capital. Was being the operative word? The small dark chuckle from Harrison cut Mark deeper than any insult. "Ms. Hayes, Sophia, please," Mark begged, taking another step. The granite-jawed security guard was suddenly at his side, a heavy hand on his bicep. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "No. Let go of me." Mark struggled, his dignity evaporating. "Sophia, you did this. You planned all of this. This was revenge." He'd shouted it. The word revenge echoed in the vast frescoed hall. Sophia watched him struggle against the guard, her expression unchanged. She was watching him as she would watch a failing data point on a screen. "Revenge, Mr. Stafford?" she asked, her voice calm. She stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the dais, looking down at him. The security guard paused, waiting for her signal. "You're flattering yourself," Sophia said, her voice no longer amplified, meant only for him, though the front rows could hear every word. "Revenge is an emotional response. What's the word you used to like messy? This wasn't messy. This was comfortable." She used his own word, and it was like a physical blow. Reed Capital was a vulnerability in our new logistics portfolio. She continued, her tone conversational, as if explaining a simple math problem to a child. "It was over-leveraged and poorly managed. Your algorithm, or rather my algorithm, the one you've been misusing for 2 years, was the only thing keeping it afloat. It was a house of cards and the wind was coming. I didn't knock it over, Mark. I just bought the plot of land it was built on. My life, my job." "Your job," she interrupted, "was a symptom of the rot. I don't take revenge, Mark. I solve problems. You, Michael, Reed, your entire insecure self-congratulatory ecosystem. You were a problem, and now you're solved." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the guard. "Let's go, sir." The guard's grip was iron. He began to march Mark not toward the grand exit, but toward a side door, a service entrance. The walk of shame. As he was being dragged away, Mark looked back. He saw Chloe, his wife, his trophy. She was not looking at him. She was surrounded by her friends, who were keeping a polite, horrified distance. Her father was on the phone, his back to her, gesticulating wildly, his face purple. Chloe was utterly alone. She looked at Mark, her expression not one of support, but of pure, undiluted hatred. He had failed her. He had lost her the kingdom. He was half dragged, half pushed through the heavy oak door. It slammed shut, and he was in a brightly lit, linoleum-tiled service hallway. The smell of industrial disinfectant and cooked-over prime rib filled his nostrils. He slumped against the wall, the adrenaline leaving him replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. It wasn't just the job. It was the apartment, which was a corporate lease. It was the car, also corporate. It was the country club membership. It was the credit lines, all of which were guaranteed by Reed Capital. He had built his entire identity on a foundation of sand, just as she'd said, and the tide had just come in. He thought of her final words, "I solve problems." The twist wasn't that she had shown up. The twist wasn't that she was with a billionaire. The twist was that it had never been about him. He wasn't the antagonist in her story. He wasn't even a supporting character. He was a line item in a risk assessment report. He was a rounding error she'd just erased. He heard a door open down the hall. It was Chloe. Her face was a ruin of streaming mascara and rage. "You!" she hissed, walking toward him, her diamonds looking cheap in the fluorescent light. "Chloe, listen, we can fix this." Smack. Her hand, heavy with the rings he'd bought her, cracked across his face. "Fix it." "You idiot. You absolute fool. You didn't just lose your job. You lost my money. My father's company. Everything. Chloe, she's my ex-wife. I can talk to her. I can..." "Talk to her? She just humiliated you in front of the entire city." Chloe was screaming now, her voice raw. "She looked at you like you were dirt, and she was right. You are nothing. You were nothing when I found you, and you're nothing now. You were just a trade up, and it was a bad trade." She spat the words at him. She pulled the massive diamond ring from her finger, the one he'd been so proud of, and threw it. The ring skittered across the floor and disappeared under a utility sink. "Our lawyers will be in touch," she said, mimicking his own words from 2 years prior. "Don't make it messy." She turned her heels, clicking angrily, and stormed back into the gala, leaving him alone in the hallway, the red imprint of her hand burning on his cheek. The heavy oak door of the service exit clicked shut, a final, definitive sound that seemed a punctuation the end of an entire era. For a moment, the faint, hysterical echo of Chloe's shriek hung in the air, a pathetic counterpoint to the restored elegance of the string quartet. Sophia watched the door, her expression as placid and still as a deep lake. She registered the event, the ugly, bright red flash of human misery, but she did not feel it. It did not touch her. It was data processed and discarded. Marcus Harrison materialized at her elbow, as silent as ever. He wasn't holding champagne. He held a single tall glass of sparkling water with a lime. He knew she never drank alcohol when she was working, and tonight, above all, was a night of work. "Well," he said, his voice a low, dry rasp that cut through the renewed party chatter. "That was theatrical. He seems to have a flair for it." Sophia accepted the water, her fingers cool and steady against the glass. "He always did," she replied, her voice just as quiet. "He was prone to dramatics. He mistook them for passion. It was one of his many inefficiencies." "He's the COO you mentioned in the acquisition brief?" Harrison asked, though he knew the answer. "The husband." "The ex-husband," Sophia corrected, taking a small, clean sip. The water was crisp and cold. And CUU was a title, not a function. It was a gift from his father-in-law. What did Mark call it, a sign-on bonus for the marriage. Harrison studied her, his gaze sharp. He was a man who read people the way she read financial code, looking for the bugs, the vulnerabilities, the hidden lines of logic. "Are you all right?" Sophia turned to look at him, and for the first time that night a small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of triumph or joy. It was a smile of completion. "Marcus," she said, "in the last 18 months I built Cassandra from a theoretical model into the most powerful predictive engine in private finance. In the last 3 months, I orchestrated a silent $9 billion acquisition of a company that was a systemic rot in our new logistics portfolio. Tonight I delivered a keynote to the most powerful people in New York, and in doing so announced our new market dominance and provided regulatory clarity on a firm built on lies. I am excellent. Good. He nodded, satisfied. Because Michael Reed is currently in the West Hall trying to get the mayor to arrest you for securities fraud and corporate espionage. This time Sophia did laugh. It was a real quiet laugh, a sound of genuine intellectual amusement. Let him. The only fraud was his last 4 quarterly reports, which he and Mark signed off on. My team flagged those discrepancies 6 months ago. We forwarded the entire unedited file to the Securities and Exchange Commission this afternoon, time-stamped exactly 1 hour before the acquisition was finalized. I believe the term is providing regulatory clarity. It ensures all parties are held accountable. Ruthless, Ms. Hayes, I like it. Harrison said, a rare glint of approval in his eyes. Clarity, Mr. Harrison? Just clarity, she replied. She had told Mark it wasn't revenge, and it wasn't. Not in the hot, emotional, messy way he understood. Revenge was for people who were still hurting. She was not hurting. She was healed. What she had done was the financial equivalent of a surgeon removing a tumor. The tumor in this case had been her past. It was a neat clinical and total excision. The fact that the tumor had screamed on its way to the incinerator was simply an unfortunate, if not entirely unsatisfying, side effect. She looked out over the ballroom. The party was fractured. The elegant facade had cracked. Small, anxious groups had formed heads huddled together. People were on their phones, their expressions ranging from shock to predatory glee. The sharks were smelling blood, and Reed Capital was the chum. She could see them, the VPs from rival firms, the hedge fund managers, all calculating, planning how to pick at the scraps of Michael Reed's shattered empire. They didn't know, of course, that Harrison Global hadn't just bought the debt. It had bought the assets. There would be no scraps left to pick. Sophia, however, was finished. She had done what she came to do. Marcus, if you'll excuse me, she said, placing her untouched water glass on a passing tray. I believe my work here is done. I have a 6 a.m. flight back to London. We have a board to brief on the restructuring. Of course. The car is waiting, he said. He offered his arm not as a romantic gesture, but as an escort, a colleague, an equal. They walked not to the service exit, but back through the center of the grand ballroom. The path cleared before them once again, but this time it wasn't the imposing line of security. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated power. The crowd parted, a sea of silk and diamonds receding from their presence. The whispers were audible. That's her. The one who... My God, she gutted him. As they reached the grand marble entrance, Sophia paused for just a second. She looked back at the glittering room, the massive chandeliers, the sea of arrogant, suddenly frightened faces. She remembered the first time she'd been to an event like this years ago on Mark's arm. She'd been terrified, wearing a dress on loan from a friend clutching his hand. He had let go almost immediately, striding off to network. Stay here, Soph, he'd said, a dismissive wave of his hand. Try not to look so impressed. The adults are talking. She had spent that night by the canapé table feeling like a fraud, a comfortable, useless accessory. Now she saw the room for what it was. Not a palace, but a fish tank. A small, self-contained ecosystem of predators and prey. And she was no longer one of the little fish darting nervously in the weeds. She wasn't even one of the sharks. She was the person who owned the tank. She turned and walked out into the cool October night air. The black Rolls-Royce was waiting at the curb, its engine a silent promise of power. The driver, the same one from her arrival, held the door. She got in the bespoke leather seat, cool and solid against her back. As the heavy door shut, sealing her in opulent silence, the car pulled away from the curb as smooth as a sigh. It paused at the corner, waiting for the light to change. And in that moment, she looked out the window. The service door she had been watching earlier burst open, and 2 of the venue's security guards, not Harrison's team, unceremoniously pushed Mark onto the pavement. He stumbled, his $5,000 tuxedo jacket askew, a dark stain of what looked like spilled wine or coffee down the front. His silk tie was undone, hanging limply. His face was a mask of ruin, pale and sweaty under the harsh glare of the streetlights. And on his left cheek a vivid red welt was already rising, the imprint of Chloe's hand, heavy with the rings he had bought her. He looked up desperate and disoriented, and his eyes, wide with a dawning, bottomless horror, met hers through the tinted glass. He saw her. He saw the car. He saw the impassive driver. He saw the woman sitting in the back, bathed in the soft glowing light of the dash, looking at him. Sophia did not look away. She did not sneer. She did not smile. She did not offer pity or scorn. She simply held his gaze, her expression one of utter, final, and absolute indifference. It was the look one gave to a line of code that had been debugged and erased. A problem that no longer existed. A variable that had been neutralized. He was a ghost. He was ballast long since jettisoned. The light changed. The car with a whisper slid into the river of New York traffic. Mark Stafford, a man who had traded his entire future for a hollow trophy, was gone, disappearing into the city's indifferent past where he belonged. Sophia Hayes, CEO, leaned her head back against the soft leather. She did not look back. She pulled her tablet from her briefcase. The screen lit up, illuminating her face with its cool blue light. She opened the file for the London board meeting and began to review the first slide of her restructuring plan. She was in the stratosphere now, and the view was crystal clear. They say success is the best revenge, but for Sophia it was just success. She didn't need to tear Mark's world down. She just needed to build her own so high that he was no longer visible. She took the pain of his betrayal and forged it into a weapon of ambition, proving that the person he called ballast was actually the only thing giving him flight. What did you think of Sophia's ultimate comeback? Was it a cold, calculated revenge, or was it simply the inevitable result of her brilliance being set free? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this story of drama and transformation, please be sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see a true power move, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories every single week. We'll see you in the next one.